Hello and welcome to There's No Business Like, a podcast where friends and industry colleagues explore topics and interview leaders in our industry of professional theatrical touring.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to There's No Business Like. I'm so excited to be with you all today. Let's go around and introduce everybody who's on the mic today. Danielle.
Hi, my name is Danielle Van Hook, and I'm the Director of Youth Theater Programs at the Alden in McLean, Virginia.
Kevin.
Kevin Maynard from Quad City Arts, splitting the border of Iowa and Illinois.
Josh.
Josh Benson with the Marion Cultural and Civic Center, kicking it here in Marion, Illinois.
And Brian.
Brian Zellmer from Kutztown University in Kutztown, Pennsylvania.
And I, of course, am Katie Miller with the Midland Center for the Arts in Midland, Michigan. So I'm so excited to get into the interview we're going to have today. But first, I wanted to ask you all, when you were a kid, was there a certain kids and family musician that you really loved and spent a lot of time listening to or hanging out with? Or did you just skip directly to adult music when you were a kid?
I think I skipped directly to adult music, but mostly it's just because that's what my parents were listening to. But honestly, the first thing that came to mind was Roy Orbison's Pretty Woman. For whatever reason, as a child, I loved that song. That song just made me so happy. And I don't know why, but when I think about my childhood, that song is very prominent.
That's so fantastic, but also completely inappropriate, Kevin.
I know. I get it.
Oh, well, do you want to hear something inappropriate?
Go for it, Danielle.
So, like Kevin, I mostly just listened to whatever my parents were listening to. And they were pretty solid Meatloaf fans. And for a long, we had all the cassette tapes. And we would just listen to them on repeat. And the song that I loved was the 12-minute Paradise by the Dashboard Light. Knew all the words, every single one of them. Loved it. Loved to sing the girl part at the end. And when I was 3, maybe, Meatloaf was coming to Pittsburgh. And I was like, oh my gosh, we should go and see him. And my mom was obviously well, that would be wildly inappropriate. Yeah, so that was the first really real music I remember as a kid. The first album that I remember having is the soundtrack to Anastasia.
Yes, Danielle.
Which is a banger.
Oh my gosh, yes. On the cassette tape. I still own it. It is in my house as we speak. So I second that. Brian, what about you?
So I don't know that kids' music was so much of a thing when I was growing up. I'm a little bit older than you guys, other than on television. So, I used to love Kids Incorporated and Zoobilee Zoo and Magic Garden. Of course, Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers. I was a big Mr. Rogers fan. And of course, they always sang and had songs. But other than when I watched the TV show, I didn't listen to them. I had an older cousin, Sherry, and she got me listening to a lot of, I guess, what you'd call adult music. It was Michael Jackson in the early days, when it was one of my youngest memories, and Cyndi Lauper, who I loved. And my favorite song was She Bop, which, of course, was totally inappropriate for a young kid. And when I found out, years later, what that song was really about, I'm like, oh my God, I was going around the house singing my head off to that thing.
I'm sensing a theme here. Josh.
Yes.
I'm going to carry that theme on. We had a record player, and we had a couple of records on there. Some old country stuff, comedy stuff, which we loved. But then we also had a Sesame Street live record. And then I always remember singing Eric Clapton's Bad Love with my dad, just to carry on that, all of us growing up with totally inappropriate music for our ages.
So for me, I also grew up with a record player. My mom has an incredible vinyl collection, and I was obsessed with the Go-Go's when I was maybe 3rd, 4th grade. And I put that thing on repeat on the record player. But I would say core memory from when I was little was the Skidamarinky Rinky Dink song.
Yeah.
From, let's see.
Eureka's
Sharon
Castle.
Lois and Sharon Lois and Bram. And you do the hand gestures that went with it. And I do that with my son now, who is about 4 years old. And so we do that and the whole thing. And it's a really nice kind of tradition to pass along. But so I asked that question because we're going to talk today with Sarah McCarthy. She is the owner and lead agent for Dandelion Artists, which is a family and children's music agency. Sarah and I are going to talk a lot about what makes a great family artist, which is why we just had that chat, how she kind of used her intuition to move from being an actor actually into the world. We're going to talk about family, music, and TYA, which means theater for young audiences. For those that aren't in the know, that's kind of a general term that we use for this family and children's sector of the industry. So I hope you enjoy.
Hi, I'm Sarah McCarthy. I'm the founder of Dandelion Artists. I'm a booking agency owner, a creative producer, and a longtime part of the performing arts industry.
Well, welcome to There's No Business Like. We're so excited to have you on the podcast. And I'm really excited to have a chat with you today because we've actually known each other for about 5 years. We don't get to see each other in person that often. So it's really nice to have a chat. So first of all, just how we know each other. We first met in 2017, actually at an Arts Midwest conference. I was wandering the conference hall as a newbie to the conference world, stumbled upon your booth, was really looking to learn more about family and youth presenting. And we just had a really nice chat. I don't know if you remember this, but it was hugely influential for me. And I found some really wonderful artists that you represent that I have been fans of ever since.
Oh, that's so nice. Meetings at conferences where somebody stumbles by and then it turns into a wonderful connection. It's gold. It's what we all hope for at the conference.
It truly is. So Sarah, why don't you get us started with your origin story? What's your background and how did you become an agent?
Well, I started out with thinking that I was going to be an actor. Went to theater school and definitely kind of had my sights on performing, going to theater school for college, and ended up realizing pretty quickly that working as an actor wasn't really my speed in terms of the business. I think that was a real gap in my education, is not really understanding what the business of acting was going to end up looking like. And I stumbled into production management through some lucky opportunities where I was able to be a production manager for some outdoor festivals and also the Philadelphia International Children's Festival, which is this wonderful festival at the Annenberg Center in Philadelphia each year. And I had a chance to work behind the scenes with amazing artists from around the world doing incredible work for young audiences. And that was really my introduction to TYA. And I didn't sort of know it at the time, but it ended up being kind of hugely influential later on in my decision to focus on work for young audiences. After I moved to Los Angeles, worked for the LA County Arts Commission for a while, and then got the job at the Getty Center. And that was really the, foundational job for my career, where I really kind of built my skill set as a presenter and a producer. One of the things that I presented there was an outdoor concert series for kids and families called the Getty Garden Concerts for Kids series. And I programmed that for about 11 years. The work for kids and families, even before I had kids, was just very meaningful to me. When I became a mom and had my second child, I decided that it was really time for me to move on from the Getty. And in the meantime, I had been saying to all of my agent friends, there's this wonderful group of children's music artists out there that don't have representation, or don't have representation that I think is really serving them in the right way. And somebody needs to round this group up and put a roster together, or, add them to your roster. And I kept saying this to a bunch of agent friends. And finally, when it became clear that I needed to move on, I talked to my husband. I was like, I think I want to try being an agent. And this is either going to be, a great idea or the most irresponsible idea I've ever had to quit my stable job and open up this kids music agency. And he was like, do it. You'll regret it if you don't do it. And I did. And that was about 9 years ago. Almost exactly 9 years ago.
Congratulations on your anniversary. That's incredible.
Thank you.
And what incredible support from your partner.
Yeah, I don't think I would have done it without that support, but it ended up really being the right thing for our family, and the first couple of years were tough, but things grew quickly, and I think it just points to, again, to sort of trusting your intuition. This has happened multiple times in my life where I needed to make a decision and it was sort of staring me in the face, even though part of me was like, what if this doesn't work? I'm not sure if this is going to work, but it was also like what I really wanted.
I love that. So you mentioned the series that you had programmed at the Getty with youth and family programming. So what pushed you in that direction? Was it kind of seeing the lack of representation, seeing an opening in the space, or is there something else that made you want to really immerse yourself in youth and family as an agent?
I think I've always been inspired by the artists that really do beautiful work. And I specialize in music programming. Music just is an art form that speaks to me. I was a singer and played the guitar, throughout college, and still do kind of as a hobby. And I saw these artists out there that were sometimes hard to track down, or, once I would get a hold of them, like they would quote me a fee that was frankly too low. Right. And I was like, oh, you just need a little bit of help on the business side. They had the artistic side, down. These just some wonderful, wonderful, talented songwriters and singers. And the way they connected with family audiences, I think, is really inspiring. There's nothing more magical than 1,000 kids and parents like dancing and singing along, on a lawn in an outdoor concert all together. It's this ultimate kind of communal music experience that just, it makes me tear up. I love it. But putting that series together every year, especially with some of the artists, was just harder than it needed to be. And going to conferences like WA or APAP, most of these artists were not represented on the floor of those conferences. And I thought, why, and that's what inspired me to kind of fill that niche.
I love that. So let's take a step back to the moment you decided to be an agent. What are those actual steps to opening your own agency? How do you establish yourself and then start recruiting artists?
Everybody's got their own story of how they came into working as an agent. For me, my origin story really starts when I had been working with a bunch of wonderful children's music artists, like I said, in a presenting capacity. And I knew that, I also knew that I couldn't keep working every weekend producing events like I was doing at the Getty with 2 kids at home. I wasn't seeing them. And I knew that something needed to change for my family and I had this idea about representing these artists because I'd had multiple conversations with different artists about it and about the need for it. I think finally what made it happen for me is I started doing a little bit of consulting on the side, helping some artists negotiate some deals. And because also the artists were coming to me and saying like, oh, we really want to take this show, but we're going to lose money on it. And I said, oh, well, why, what did you say when you asked for more money? And they said, oh, well, we didn't ask for more money because we didn't want to, hurt their feelings or, and I just said, I kind of stepped in and I said, let me help see if I can negotiate something. And of course I was able to get their presenter to increase the fees so that they wouldn't lose money on the show. And I realized that I just sort of had a knack for talking this through because essentially it's the same conversation I was having as a presenter, booking the artists I was booking. I just sort of switched sides of the conversation. Some of the artists that I had been working with started to kind of take notice. And in particular, Justin Roberts had seen some of the work that I had done for another band. And he said, I heard that you helped book these shows for them. Is that true? And I said, oh yeah, and he said, well, I'm thinking about leaving my agent. I was like, oh, and I knew his agent. I was friends with his agent. I was like, well, what does she think about this? And I ended up calling her and she and I had a really nice conversation. She was like, please take Justin. I'm so glad it's you. Like, if you're interested in this at all. She was like moving on to sort of different music genres, and it ended up being a really nice transition. So he was my first client with his agent's blessing, which is really the right way to take on an artist that's already represented. It was a really nice transition. And then once the word sort of got out that I was going to start booking for Justin Roberts, other artists quickly took notice. And within a couple of months, I ended up bringing on board the Okie Dokie Brothers and Secret Agent 23 Skidoo and Recess Monkey. And so that was my roster when I really quit the Getty. And that's how I started. I will say too, like I just learned as I went. I started talking to agent friends. I told them that I was doing this. And the nice thing it was that I was plugged into this community already. So I had a lot of agents that I admired, and their mentorship really helped me get started.
I love that. What about the challenges that you found in establishing your own business and then like coming up with a brand? Like you very much do children's and families music. So is that something you gravitated towards? And was that an important part of your initial branding of your agency?
Yeah, it was. It was really intentional. I think as a buyer on the presenting side, it really is helpful to be able to understand at a glance what an agent specializes in.
How do you decide which artists to represent? Is there an X factor that you look for, or is it a variety of things that makes you want to work with someone?
I want to work with artists who are first and foremost writing really incredible material. I always start with the songwriting. Myself as a music lover, I always start there and want to represent artists that are really saying something in a beautiful, fun and unique way. And that is a bit of an X factor. I mean, that goes to my personal taste. I'm also looking for artists who not only can record a wonderful CD, but who can translate that into an incredible live performance. And the ability to interact with kids in a live concert is a special skill that it can't be taught very easily. And some artists really have it and some don't. And having the opportunity to work as a producer for so many years and watch so many artists come through and perform on our stages at the Getty Center gave me a real window into how and why certain artists could connect so beautifully with young audiences and what made that possible. So that's the other thing that I've always been looking for, is that interactivity. I think there's sort of a teacher quality, or just taking kids at face value and not talking down to them, really like respecting kids, I think is the heart of it. Also, kids are brutally honest. If it's not working, then your show is dying. But when they love you, it's the greatest thing in the world.
It is. Oh, I love that.
And then finally, artists that are just a pleasure to work with. I just can't represent artists that are
absolutely.
And we've all become, really wonderful friends and a family in that way, because not only is everybody really good at what they do, but they're super professional and reliable. And I put myself out there as much as my artists, the presenters trust me to represent artists that can deliver. And that's part of what I look for too.
So they know if they're on your label, they're in the presence of other quality artists.
Exactly.
So just to someone who isn't an agent, I think the artist-agent relationship can be a little mysterious in nature. So can you explain how you work with the artists you represent and what that relationship is like?
I joke with other agent friends of mine, it's very much like a marriage. You really have to get to know each other and what your goals are and what each of you can bring to the table. I'm not the perfect agent for every artist out there, and vice versa. It's really about, do our goals fit with each other? Do I know the types of presenters at the types of venues that they want to perform in? And is their show right for those series? That sort of understanding what the goals are and what the potential is, I think is really, really important. And then for me, it's a long-term relationship. It is something that takes a few years to really get going and have success with.
Yeah, it's nice to have that feedback loop, right? Because you're hearing directly from presenters in terms of what they are looking for, whether it's themes, they want to pull out from your artist music, engagement opportunities. We've worked together in that way. But what is the actual process of routing building tours and booking gigs?
Well, I think the pandemic has changed everything, which is, the understatement of the decade. But, we used to rely more heavily on, routing when I was, would pitch a price and say like, well, we can do it for this price if we can get some other presenters in your area. Right now, I mean, that's still the case, but I would say that we're a little more conservative in quoting fees to make sure that we get those travel expenses covered. And then if we can build more dates around it, then we can sort of split some of those fees among the presenter. But we also need one presenter to be willing to shoulder those expenses if they're the first presenter in the area that wants to bring them out. The nice thing about representing music is that it doesn't need to be a contiguously routed tour for 8 weeks, the way a larger children's theater production needs to be. That's one of the things that I think has made my roster really nimble and easy to book, because we can, zip out for a weekend, play a series of shows, and then the artists fly home with the instruments on the plane. And we're not in a situation where the van has to drive from city to city. That said, I have a new show that is a musical theater piece, which is totally going to need to be a contiguously routed tour. And I am learning how to do that and how important that routing is. I've also pulled in my friends at Holden and Arts to help consult on that. They are just pros at booking routed tours, and it's a real specialty that I'm learning. That I'm not an expert in yet, but I knew who to call, and they're helping me think some of that through. The fees, how to quote a fee, is something that incorporates, so much more than just the artist's time during the show. There's a whole level of groundwork and marketing and songwriting and recording and all this other artistic work that happens. The fee doesn't directly, repay some of those costs, but it is part of the world picture for the artist, for their income and how they're going to make their songwriting career, end up in the black at the end of the year, between radio play and live performances and selling merch at the concerts. And so all of that goes into setting the fees in concert with my artists very, very closely.
So I was on a call with folks from the TYA industry, and someone mentioned that their artists that they work in particular really had not had a pay raise. They had not seen their fees go up in about 10 years time. I guess made a lot of sense to me, but also was completely shocking. So have you seen kind of the same trend where artist fees have really stayed the same in the time you've been working as an agent, or have you seen kind of, cost of living increases, or have you been able to adjust artist fees according to what they really truly need?
I will say in the years leading up to the pandemic that yes, we were slowly and steadily increasing fees, especially as those, shows were successful in other places, and we could kind of point to the audiences that were coming out and the value that they were bringing to the venues. That was really growing up to the pandemic. I think the pandemic really stunted everything. We're all just trying to make it work. We've still, in some of those shows we're rescheduling, we're honoring the terms of the shows that we booked in 2019 or 2020 with the same fees now. And obviously expenses have gone way, way up. Travel, in particular, was terrible this summer. I will say that there were some presenters who I went back to this summer with deals that we had negotiated back in 2020 or 2019 for these shows that ended up being rescheduled. And I said, look, that the travel expenses that we estimated back then are not covering the real expenses now. And our shortfall is $700 or, and I would come to them with real numbers and say, this is what we're looking at. And I'll say, this happened 3 or 4 times, and those presenters did end up giving us that extra money, which was hugely helpful. And again, this goes to the relationships, right? Of we're not trying to pull one over on each other. We're really trying to make sure that the artists don't end up losing money.
Yeah, absolutely. And what would be your ask of presenters then who you're in that conversation with, especially those that are new, aren't maybe used to negotiating or don't really know what industry standard is, what would you want them to know, or what would your advice be to them that are having this conversation with you or another agent regarding those factors?
I would just say transparency. I think that was the key this summer, was really just coming back to them with our, flight receipts and saying, this is where we're at. That, I think everybody understands too, that costs are going up. It's not just us, it's everybody. And I would say real, transparency and honesty, but also not being afraid to ask for what you need. Also, I made it a point to say, like, look, I'm not going to take a commission on these flight expenses. This is really just covering these travel expenses for the artists. And I think that they could understand that I was really trying to, work with them there.
Now, you mentioned a new musical theater project, and I know you've embarked down a new road in your work in the last 2 years or so, moving into the production space and working with one of your artists on a brand new project. Can you tell us a little bit about it and some of the challenges of becoming a producer on top of being an agent?
One of my artists, Jazzy Ash, who her name is Ashley St. Armand. She and I have been working together for many years with her concert program that she's toured all over the US. She's an incredible writer and songwriter, and she started writing this musical about 3 or 4 years ago. And told me about it. It's a story that's inspired by her ancestors. Her family is based outside of New Orleans in Louisiana for generations. She can actually trace her ancestry to a plantation in Bachery, Louisiana, which is just outside of New Orleans. And she wrote this play called North about the Underground Railroad and about some of the folks who escaped. It's a fictional story, but everything in the play is based on something that actually happened to real people. She did an incredible amount of research. So the play itself was hugely exciting and inspiring to me. And she started playing for me some of the songs. And I just thought, man, this is incredible. And she said, how could we get this off the ground? Like, what would we do? And I decided to take it to some of the presenters who had presented her work before, and ask them if they would want to support this new project. And the Lead Center in Lawrence, Kansas, was one of those venues. And they were the first ones to come on board, and they felt the work was really important, and they loved working with Ashley, and they were our first commissioning partner. Pulling commissioning partners together and adding them to this project, and that whole conversation was very new for me, but it was also very exciting because I believed in the work, and I just, once people started saying yes, it was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. We're gonna produce this play. We've got 4 wonderful co-commissioners. We're in rehearsals right now. They're rehearsing it in Southern California at Segerstrom Center for the Arts, which is one of our presenting co-commissioners. Being a part of the development of this piece has been hugely exciting. It's actually, brought me back to some of my theater school days. I'm kind of part of the production crew again, really leaning into my directing experience and my programming experience. And it's hugely exciting.
What's the challenge of balancing that active creation and being kind of on the back end with all the other stuff you have going on, because you still have a full roster of artists that you're repping at the same time?
It's really hard, if not impossible, to do everything on your own. And as a solo entrepreneur, sometimes you feel like, oh my God, it's all on my shoulders. And there have been times where I've sort of forgotten that, oh, maybe I could reach out and find somebody else to help me with this part of the business. And so I've still got 2 women who are working part-time for me right now, who are just incredible. And I don't think I would be able to have taken this project on without their help.
So on top of our mutual love of youth and family programming, something we have in common is that we're both women and working moms in this industry. So I specifically remember last season, we were working together to try and finalize a booking. I don't know if you remember this, but I was on deadline. You were trying to prep to leave for spring break, I think, with your family. And there's a 3-hour time difference between us. So because of all of that chaos happening, like we're finalizing this booking. I'm in the car, had just picked up my son from preschool. I'm on speakerphone. You're like trying to get out the door. And that was okay. Like we could hear the kids in the background and all this stuff, but that was okay. That's just how we were going to get the business done. Right. And then everyone was going to be able to go on vacation and like go about their days. And I remember I called my son Honey Bunny, like in the backseat. You're like, oh, I called my kids Honey Bunny. You know, it was just like one of those moments of like camaraderie in the business and really truly understanding where each other were coming from and that like, this is just life. This is how we're getting it done. So, and I sort of hate this question, but I think it's worth conversation. What's your experience been like first as a woman, second as a mom, and third, an entrepreneur taking on a business venture yourself? What has that been like kind of holding those identities together in this industry?
For me, the secret is that it's never exactly in balance. You're cooking on a stove with like 6 different pots going, and you can really only stir 1 or 2 at a time. And I think, you know, just realizing too that you can really try to keep your eye on everything, but some things need more attention or demand that attention. And we're all just doing the best that we can. Being a parent is so all-encompassing. And you want your kids to like know what you do and kind of be a part of it. And man, during the pandemic, there were so many times where like my daughter was, you know, doing her homework under my desk. The kids are just everywhere and a part of my life in such a wonderful way. But at the same time, trying to get time to focus on both sides, on the business or on my kids, feels like you're always leaving one thing behind. And I'm not really sure what the answer is. I don't know anybody who's would raise their hand and say, I figured out the work-life balance. You know, especially the parenting, there are times when I really have to shut my door and say, you know, I can't help you right now. I'll be out in 2 hours. And there are times when I have to shut off my computer and just say like, I didn't finish everything, but I got to drive the kids to team practice or, you know, whatever we're doing. And just having to be okay with that. Lots of times I say, you know, like the good thing is I'm not like working in the emergency room, right? Like people aren't dying right now.
It's not life or death. Yeah.
Almost everything can wait a few hours or can wait a day, which is nice. And when it can't, then, you know, then you get kids in the background of the cell phone conversation, and that's okay too.
It's totally okay. And, you know, as a professional, like I really appreciated the fact that you were totally okay with the fact that I was in the car, right? I'm not sitting at my desk in my office and being all professional. Like this is life. This is how we have to get this done. And I personally, just as a friend and colleague, really appreciated that about you.
Yeah, I think that flexibility is key, and just being like, you know, and understanding that, you know, we are multifaceted people, right? It's like our families do come first. And, you know, yes, we want to do these wonderful programs, but we also are dedicated to our personal lives. And that's good. That is the most important thing. And I think helping each other do that is one of the best things we can do to help each other figure out how to get a little closer to that balance.
I agree. Think about when you were first starting out in the field, going back to like when you're first getting into theater and presenting. What do you wish you had known then that you know now?
In my career, over and over again, there have been moments where I didn't know what to do, or I felt out of my element. And I would say, you know, leaning into relationships with people that you trust, professional relationships, other colleagues that you admire that do a really great job, and talking to them about the issue that you're having. You know, people are very generous with their thoughts and advice, and leaning into that is something that I had to do over the years that really benefited me and helped me work through some difficult situations. And then I would also say just trusting my intuition too. If I could say to my 25-year-old self, look, trust that when you feel like this is the right decision, I think, lean into what your feelings are telling you, more so than what even other people's opinions at times. And also knowing whose opinion to dismiss. Several people, when I said that I was going to start this agency, approached me and said, oh, this is a really sweet idea, Sarah, but there's no money in kids music. And said that to me point blank. And these were people in the children's music industry. And I said, oh, well, okay. Thanks for that thought. And I, went home and I was like, well, there's no money in the way that you're approaching children's music, but my idea is a little different, and having the wherewithal to just say, you know what, I'm just going to ignore that comment again and go forward, with my idea. I think if I could just, pat my younger self on the back and say, you do know what to do, you just have to, be flexible and keep going.
So thanks for sharing that. Last question. What do you love most about working in the performing arts industry today?
I love the people in this industry. I love my artists. They're incredibly creative and professional and put their heart and soul into their work. And so do, my agent colleagues and my presenter colleagues. I have to say we all are doing this because we love the kind of work we do and being able now, after what we've all been through, to kind of put our arms around each other and say, let's keep going, let's move forward and create new work is hugely rewarding. It's all about the relationships.
I love that. And that's a perfect note to end on. Sarah, thank you so much for spending time with us today. It has been so lovely chatting with you, and I'm glad we got to dig into some of my burning questions, at least, about your work and what it's like to work in TYA and be a fabulous agent like you.
Katie, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure talking to you.
And welcome back. I hope you really enjoyed that conversation with Sarah. I know that I did. She's a dear friend and colleague, and we really had a great chat. So we're going to kick off with Kevin. What did you think?
I thought it was a great interview, and I thought it was really interesting. I think it's interesting to call back to our previous conversation in that none of us really here listened to children's family music growing up. But now, it is very prevalent, I think, not only in our lives, for those of us that, for those of you that do have kids, but just in our programming, I think it's way more prevalent. And just her comment about, that, there is no money in children's and family music. And it turns out that there is, if you market it right, if you get out there and tell people about it. And so it's interesting to think about from the time that we were kids to now that people like Sarah helped build that market and help propel people like, Justin Roberts and people on her roster.
I love her response to that criticism that was voiced to her whenever she was starting out, that, yeah, there hasn't been any money in it in the way that you've been doing it.
Yes.
But I've got some different ideas, and I'm going to move forward differently. And there is an industry to be had here. If we treat these like the respectable musicians that they actually are, they're just making the music for a different audience. But treating them like the professionals that they are, they're fantastic and wonderful. And she has multiple Grammy Award winners on her roster, which speaks to the level of artist and musician that she has.
Yeah, she trusted her intuition. And just like other people that we've interviewed talked about following your bliss, she knew that this was something that brought her joy and that she just could market it to make it into a living.
And I do think half of our job is intuition, and half of our jobs in this industry is then following the data and the numbers and looking at that. But there is that moment where you just have to make the leap, whether that is booking a show, pulling together some sort of community event, or changing jobs, changing fields, changing, the direction you're headed in the course of your career. So I really do think that conversation about intuition has a lot of juice to it.
Katie, I love what you said right there about mentioning changing course and going with your intuition, because she went with her intuition to move in a direction that was better for her family and to move away from a career that she had established herself in, to take a big risk from a career standpoint, but one that really moved her well to take care of her family better and to be in a better position to have a balance with her family.
Yeah, Josh. And, I love this conversation and bringing this conversation to a wider audience, because I've had a lot of conversations like this, especially with other moms in this industry, but also with fathers and other caregivers. It's really hard to balance the day to day of, whatever's on your plate at that time, the future forward stuff you're working on, your next season, your budget, and also making sure that you're seeing work live that you might want to book, but also work that fills your soul, that might not be right for your venue. And a lot of that stuff happens during family time. And, it's a real struggle, and it's a really hard way to find a balance.
Well, and that brings us to like the conversation that Katie had with her about, about the phone call that they had and how they met each other where they were in the hecticness of getting ready for spring break and picking up your son from preschool. And I think there's an amazing place in this industry now, especially coming out of the pandemic, to have a lot more understanding for people they're not going to be sitting in the office in a professional environment whenever they take your phone call half the time.
Yeah, I think we're normalizing that side of the business, and just, starting to be more accepting of that, and just understanding that, life happens. One thing that Sarah said that I really loved was that this can wait 2 hours. It can wait until the next day, because like your family is a very important thing. And as somebody who, doesn't have kids, but I've got a lot of close friends who have kids and staff members who have kids, that, trying to understand that balance and being open to their situation and being able to understand, say like, hey, I understand like you need to get out of here at a certain time because you've got to go take care of your kid, or just understanding that doing our best to achieve that work-life balance, or creating an environment where you can best try to achieve that. Because I think she's right. I mean, we all strive for a perfect work-life balance. And, I think as soon as I think that I've got there, like something else explodes, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I'm back to work, or I'm back to doing this. So.
And it doesn't have to just center around family either.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I've got acreage and the Benson Ranch that I live on, and I often take calls while I'm out on the tractor, and nothing disarms an agent more than saying, hey, I'm sitting on the tractor, but I'm happy to talk to you. Mm-hmm. Business continues to move forward. And I think, especially right now, people are happy to meet you where you are, whether it's on a tractor or picking up your child.
Yeah, Katie, I'm really glad you asked this question, because I'm not a mom, but I am a parent, and I totally related to it. I liked her analogy of stirring too many pots, because I love to cook, and I often go a little bit overboard sometimes with doing big meals, having too many things going at once, and I'll accidentally, maybe once in a while, burn something, and it's okay, and just like she said, it's okay to have those times where you've got to close the door and you tell the family, sorry, I need these 2 hours for work. But also, it's okay to turn off the phone or get up, even if you're not done with that important work project, because your family needs you. And I really appreciated that.
And that work-life balance looks different for everybody. And we're not ever going to solve the conundrum that is balancing work and life and family obligations, whether that's your kids or your parents or other needs. And then just the need for like your own personal social time. Kevin, like you don't have kids, but your time is also valuable. So finding that balance, it's never going to be perfect, but to the point about normalizing it, the more we talk about it and the more we give each other grace and just recognize that like this is the way it is now, the more permission we give to others, even though we don't really need to, but I think we sometimes feel that we need that. The more permission we give to others to take the phone and the phone call in the car, on the tractor, on your way to whatever activity it is. Or to say, yeah, I'll get to that tomorrow.
And I think you're right, Katie. I mean, the more we talk about it, the more it becomes normalized, and the more people in leadership can start to understand that, because we work in a challenging industry. I mean, we have late hours, weekends, and all sorts of things, and that can be a difficult balance.
And I think too, there can be a misconception that if you say you love your job, or you're passionate about your job, or you're doing this thing that is your dream, that for some reason you will work all hours of the day because it's your passion. At least for me, that was sort of how I saw my life as a young professional. And it's kind of easy to see wrapping your identity up in this love and passion that you have. But there's no reason that any of these jobs should be exempt from like regular work standards for other industries. And, we do need to look at work-life balance because we're not just artists and arts creators, but like we do need to be parents and we do need to be all of these other things in our lives.
Well, thank you all for having this conversation today. I think it's really valuable, especially for those just coming into our industry. And I hope we continue to have these conversations in many different forums and formats. So thanks again for joining us on There's No Business Like, and we'll see you next time.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to the No Business Like podcast. Our producers and hosts are Brian Zelmer, Josh Benson, Kevin Maynard, Katie Miller, and me, Danielle Van Hook. Views expressed in this podcast are ours alone and not reflective of the organizations we are a part of. You can find and follow us everywhere at nobusinesslike.com, which has links to all of our socials. Stay in touch, my friends.
Oh my gosh, my vacuum cleaner is going in the background.
We're going to take a pause because my dog is scratching at the door. I'll be right back.
Okay.
So what I left out is that I'm carrying on that tradition because I told my daughter that Tag Team was playing at IEBA. And I was like, yeah, they play Whoop, There It Is. And she's like, Whoop, there it is. And like knew it.